Once again, E3 has come and gone, which usually means it's time to go over who won and who lost. Unfortunately, I don't really think that would be all that worthwhile or appropriate this year, because in all honesty, we all lost. Yeah, I'm sorry, but the overall feeling I was left with after this year's mostly abysmal showings was not exactly one of hopeful excitement. It was more a feeling of dread, disappointment, and just plain anger. Seriously, what the hell has happened to this industry? To be fair though, there were some pretty good moments as well, but the fact that they stood out as much as they did and that even relatively mundane and basic features and decencies were treated like something revolutionary isn't exactly a good sign, is it? I honestly think gaming as we know it is dying, at least based on these pitiful displays. With that in mind, I just don't think a traditional best and worst list would really work this year. Granted, there were more than a few things worth discussing, but I'd rather just do a general recap of the more noteworthy moments, as I again wouldn't really say there were too many winners this time around anyway. In other words, I just can't be bothered to do an actual list this time. Now, obviously, I won't be going over absolutely everything that happened, and I probably won't go into too many details in general. I'll basically just be recapping what I personally thought and felt about some of the things we were shown this year, going in no particular order and not really ranking anything. These are just some of my opinions about E3 2019. I'm not quite sure where to start, so why don't we just kick off where E3 itself technically did and talk about Stadia. Actually, let's just talk about cloud/game streaming in general, as Google certainly weren't the only ones banging that particular drum this year. Yeah, I think we all knew that gaming was heading in this direction, and I honestly think it's an intriguing idea in certain ways, but I'm sorry, we're just not there yet. Sure, it may work fine for some, but plenty of people, me included, could really only hope to do 720 if that, and that's not even taking into account data caps, service outages, network errors, and so on and so forth. Again, being able to access any game on pretty much any device of your choosing is a decent enough idea, and Stadia actually seems to work relatively well, but it's just way too premature. It's also just a bit off-putting how much the industry seems to already be in love with this concept, as it obviously means more control over content for them and less rights and options for us. Even if we disregard all the other troubling aspects of this though, Stadia in particular would still be a train wreck, because get this, you'll still have to buy any games on there individually for full price. Sure, some games will be included with a so-called Pro subscription, but you still won't get access to the entire library, which is the only way this should work. Honestly, this is one of the most boneheaded moves in recent memory. This would be like Netflix only giving you access to 1 or 2 shows while everything else had to be bought separately. There's no way to store or play these games offline after all, so if I'm not going to save anything and there are no other benefits, why wouldn't I just buy the physical or digital versions instead? While the streaming-based gaming industry might be all but inevitable, we're just not ready for it, and even if we were, this is not how it should work. All this does is make me dread the days when gaming does turn online only, because the industry seems determined to find a way to bleed us dry no matter what. This was really only the tip of the shitberg though, but thankfully EA made it a bit easier for us to avoid getting sucked in too deeply. You see, they had the brilliant idea of just telling everyone exactly what they were going to show and when, meaning most people could, and probably did, just skip most of their presentation. After all, they only had one game worth mentioning anyway. Yup, the only thing EA showed that most people, including me, gave even a remote toss about was Star Wars Jedi: The Fallen Order. The presentation itself was decent enough, but I have to admit, the game did not look all that great. Don't get me wrong, it didn't look bad, but it was just sort of bland, especially for a Star Wars game. Still, at least they did show us some actual gameplay. Fine, cinematic trailers can be good, especially for teasing games in early development, but there was such a lack of gameplay this year that you'd think this was a damn film festival. Seriously, if you don't have anything to show yet, don't bother with the presentation, just wait! I honestly think Sony had the right idea, as it's just not worth showing up if you can't actually show off your games. Again, cinematic trailers can be nice, but only gameplay demos really give you a proper idea of what the game might be like. Oh, even gameplay can be misleading, no doubt about that, but as a general rule, it's still a much better representation of the final product than some pre-rendered cinematic that may not even hint much at what the game is actually like to play. That's not to say that we didn't get any gameplay, but it was mostly from smaller indie developers and/or from the staggering amount of mobile games. Bethesda in particular was all aboard the mobile train, and it just comes off as scummy. I mean, it's not like they're pushing the boundaries of that platform or anything, they're obviously only after that sweet microtransaction goodness. Bethesda's conference was actually the stuff of legends this year, in that it was legendarily dull and obnoxious. Okay, so Doom Eternal looks pretty great, and both Ghostwire Tokyo and Deathloop sound interesting, but that was pretty much all they had. The rest was mostly just updates, DLC, and mobile games, not that the audience seemed to mind. Now, I'm not saying that this audience was bought off or anything, but come on, something was definitely not right. They were whooping like crazy for the most mundane, nothing comments, even going nuts at the simple mention of a title for DLC with no footage. If these guys weren't drunk, paid off employees or all of the above, then congratulations, your why gaming is dying. Speaking of which, PC gaming is apparently already dead, at least going by the PC gaming show. Yeah, they had a few decent showings, I guess, but there really wasn't as much as one single solitary moment where I didn't think my brain was shutting down. It was just so tedious. It's really my own damn fault for watching it though, as I don't think anyone actually cares about this turd anymore. That can't really be said of Ubisoft though, not that they themselves seem to care all that much. I'm not kidding, the only interesting bit was Watch Dogs Legion, which to be fair does look pretty great, but the rest of the show felt like a complete waste. I mean, when you devote quite a big section of your gaming conference to announce a fucking TV show, you've officially failed. I also have to say that Ubisoft seriously needs to do something about their Tom Clancy obsession. Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Rainbow Six Siege, The Division 2, they just can't control themselves. None of these things even look all that great, especially when you won't show us any actual gameplay, and as cool as he is, even the Punisher won't make Ghost Recon any more intriguing. Oh, but you did have one neat looking surprise, didn't you? I genuinely thought this might have been something good, as it initially seemed quite promising. It had a dark horror vibe, and that weird thing on the guy's arm was intriguingly mysterious, but then they ruined it by revealing it to just be yet another Tom Duckmothering Clancy game. Ubisoft? More like Ubi hard for Tom Clancy. At least Microsoft had a bit more variety on offer, but it was mostly a variety of boredom. Sure, that Keanu Reeves moment was kind of fun, but I'm seriously struggling to come up with anything else that didn't just make me go, eh. In fact, the best thing they showed was undoubtedly Way to the Woods, and isn't it just a little sad that such an unassuming indie title would so easily steal the show? Well, alright, Psychonauts 2 looked pretty promising as well, and that Blair Witch game could be interesting, but overall, this just felt so uninspired. I mean, Microsoft was handed pretty much an open goal this year, what with Sony not being there, and somehow they still couldn't hit the net. Hell, they couldn't even find the damn ball. Case in point, their gross misuse of Ninja Theory. Here you've managed to get your hands on a developer renowned for making deep single-player experiences with strong narratives and compelling characters, and what do you have them make? Basically Overwatch with melee combat. Yeah, I know, they're probably working on other stuff as well, but for fuck's sake, Microsoft. Now, I know I've been pretty damn negative so far, but believe it or not, I don't want to be. I'd love nothing more than to sing the praises of everything I saw, but there just wasn't that much to get excited about this year. Until Square Enix entered the scene. I know, I'm really surprised as well. Okay, so I don't think I'd call this an excellent conference per se, but it was definitely one of the better ones this year, and it was leagues above their previous presentations. Part of this could very well be down to the incredibly low bar set by their supposed competitors, but yeah, Square Enix actually kinda delivered. The big theme here was RPGs, as not only are we getting remasters of a couple of Saga games, but they're finally giving Final Fantasy VIII some love as well. It'll be interesting to see how that particular remaster turns out though, as I was under the impression that at least part of the original code for that game was lost. Either way, looking forward to trying all of these titles. I'm also kind of excited for their new Avengers game, though I also have some concerns. I mean, it started off looking like something along the lines of the most recent Spider-Man game only featuring the Avengers, but then they started talking about how this game will have regular content delivered over multiple years. This sounds a bit too live servicey to my ear. It still looked like my kind of thing though, but let's face it, there was really only one game people cared about here. I am of course talking about Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. I don't really know what all the fuss was about though, because while it may look decent enough and a new expansion is all well and good, it's still just a mobile game, so I don't really care. They did have this one other thing though, and yeah, this joke has gone on long enough. Obviously the big talking point here was the presentation of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. While it certainly doesn't look bad though, not by any standards, I have to admit that I'm not entirely blown away either. Again, it looks like it'll probably be a decent experience, but I don't know, that combat just looked a bit too frantic. There was just so much going on and everything was flashing and moving around to the point where you couldn't really keep track of the action. It honestly felt a bit like the gaming equivalent to jangling some keys in front of a baby's face. It's like they were trying to distract us. I'm also not a fan of how they're clearly trying to bleed as much money as possible out of this thing. Not only will there be multiple limited editions, not only will these editions apparently come with bonus summon materia DLC, hinting at a possible microtransaction system for materia, but this will also be kind of an episodic title, with this first release only covering the initial Midgar section. Fair enough, this money-grubbing attitude is not exactly a unique thing in this industry, and it won't necessarily affect the game that much, but based on what we've seen and heard so far, they'll more than likely be selling portions of this game for the next decade. It's frankly a bit gross, as it just comes across as so excessively greedy and and exploitative. Not that we can really put all the blame for this on Square Enix though, as this wouldn't happen if they couldn't get away with it. People love this franchise and this game in particular so much that they'll not only accept all of this, they'll actively defend it even though they more than likely know it's a scummy move. Seriously fanboys, this should not be celebrated, so please don't. All that said, this does still look like a very competent game, and I'll definitely get at least this first part. I do have concerns, some pretty major ones, but not enough to ignore the game altogether. The new combat system might work much better than I think as well, so I'll try to go in with an open mind. At the very least, it looks like I'll get plenty of enjoyment out of playing as Tifa. In any case, Square Enix did put on a pretty good show this year, but they didn't exactly save E3 as it were. As a matter of fact, it almost felt like we might have to look to the indies for a proper reassurance that great games can and are still being produced, and Kinda Funny had us more than covered on that front. Okay, so a lot of people wouldn't really count this showcase as an actual part of E3, considering it was just a pre-recorded video put together by a group of online entertainers, but in actual fact, it was more worthy of being included in the lineup than most of the big-name conferences. After all, they actually showed pretty much just gameplay, and most of it looked fun, interesting, and inventive. Now, I couldn't possibly go over everything presented in this showcase as they just covered so many games, but suffice it to say that they made it very clear that indie gaming really is where it's at these days. Fair enough, there were a few recurring elements here as well, but there was still way more variety, passion, and just plain fun in this one showcase than in all the others combined. At least that's what I thought until Nintendo came in and single-handedly restored my hope for the future of gaming. Not to sound too much like a fanboy, but this Direct really was pretty much non-stop brilliance from beginning to end. Sure, there were one or two slightly underwhelming announcements, and there were quite a few ports of older games, but they were still great games. I mean, just look at this selection. Trials and Collection of Mana, Witcher 3, No More Heroes 3, Contra, Panzer Dragoon, Astral Chain, Spyro, Ni no Kuni, Alien Isolation, Super Lucky's Tale, it just goes on and on and on. They even managed to get me excited for Luigi's Mansion 3, and I really haven't gotten along with that series until now. Fine, not everyone will like the same types of games, and if you preferred the lineup in one or more of the other conferences, then more power to you, but Nintendo really knocked it out of the park this year. So much variety, so much quality, so much fun and joy, all with gameplay and pretty much no corporate bullshit. It really is absolutely no wonder why people love Nintendo so much. Apart from that, I don't really have that much more to cover, so let's just end on a high note. I still maintain that this was a pretty miserable E3 overall, but thankfully there were still a few bright spots and it ended with one hell of a send-off. The future of gaming may still look a bit uncertain, but it seems that no matter what, there will always be something for everyone after all.